Welcome, everyone, to the intersection of city politics and everyday life. I'm Brian Lehrer. An estimated 500,000 undocumented immigrants live in New York City, 1.2 million in the region. Today, an update on their uncertain future under a regime that came to power with this kind of talk.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
That was election rhetoric 2 years ago. Now it drives policy. Deportations of longtime U.S. residents are increasing. But yesterday, the White House suffered a setback in that arena, its effort to end DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the program that shields undocumented young adults whose parents brought them here as children. Injunctions from 2 courts had already temporarily protected current DACA recipients, but a federal judge in Washington, D.C. has gone further. Judge John Bates ordered the government to resume accepting new applications from this group and to keep DACA in place if the administration couldn't offer clear reasons why they view DACA as unlawful. But Judge Bates did put a 90-day stay on his own decision to give Trump's people time to rewrite their rationale. Meanwhile, many deportations continue. Locally, in a 6-day sweep through our city, Long Island, and the Hudson Valley 2 weeks ago, Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers arrested 225 people. ICE reported that most of them were convicted criminals or had criminal charges pending. Was it a victory for public safety? It's complicated, and we'll address it shortly with our guests. Plus 2 other breaking immigration stories: the nationality-based travel ban, which reached the Supreme Court today, and we'll tackle H-1B visas, which allow foreign skilled workers to come to the U.S., and there are major new proposed restrictions on H-1Bs, which our city's growing tech sector relies upon for many workers. To bring us up to date on all this, Alisa Wellek, Executive Director of the Immigration Defense Project, which works to expand immigrant rights, especially as they collide with the criminal justice system. Antonio Alarcon, Youth Organizer for Make the Road New York, which works to make life better for immigrants through community organizing and a range of programs. He's a DACA recipient who's graduating from Queens College soon. We're also honored to have Cyrus Mehta at our table. His leading immigration law firm represents both corporate and individual clients in business and family matters. Welcome to all of you. Antonio, congratulations on your impending graduation next month, I understand, from Queens College.
Thank you.
And as a DACA recipient, what did you think of that court ruling yesterday?
Well, as a DACA recipient and having all the privilege that came with this social security number, I was able to go to college, able to visit my family in Mexico. I know this is huge for us. We have been under the attack of an administration that is very racist and xenophobic. So for us, it's something huge. But I mean, we still have 90 days, and we will see what's the response from the government. But again, we will continue our fight, and that's something that we have been doing over the last 2 years, and obviously since 2001 when the DREAMA was introduced.
Alisa, the court's rationale was really pretty remarkable, telling the Trump administration, you haven't even given us a reason that you want to suspend DACA.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty remarkable that courts time and time again have said either the reason you give is unconstitutional in the case of the travel ban, or you haven't given any reason. You know, Trump had just claimed, DACA's unconstitutional with no further basis, and the court said it was arbitrary and capricious that he do that.
Yeah. Cyrus, if President Obama was able to create DACA with an executive order, he didn't have to go through Congress. That was being challenged in the courts. But if he can do that with an executive order at his discretion, why can't Trump end it with an executive order at his discretion?
Well, that's a good point, and that's what Trump is trying to argue. The problem is that if you want to end it, there has to be a rational basis to end it. And there's a unique judicial doctrine that's evolving in the Trump era where you can use Trump's statements, tweets, and utterances that display animus towards groups of immigrants. It's been used against him in the travel ban cases, and it's also been used against him in DACA cases. And so if a policy rescission is driven by animus, that could be grounds for a legal challenge, and a unique and novel challenge in the Trump era.
And how does that feel to you as an individual when you were here in 2015 when the Trump campaign launched and he came out and the first thing that he started running on was that clip that we played, which is so offensive and insulting. How did it feel to be a target of that?
Well, as someone who's Mexican, and obviously that message was directly to me and to my Mexican brothers and sisters, that was very offensive, especially coming from at that time, someone who was running for president, right? Like, I feel like the United States, it's not about that, right? Like, it's the people of this country recognize the contribution of immigrants. This nation was built by immigrants, and at the end of the day, seeing someone who was attacking our community was outrageous. And for us as dreamers, I feel like that was kind of like the first attack towards our community, towards our parents as well. But obviously, it was the fuel for us to keep fighting for our dreams, to keep fighting for our families. And as you you have seen over the last 2 years, we didn't like hide from the administration. Opposite to that, we went to the streets. We took the hallways of Congress, and we have taken the courts now. So we're not going to stop. We're going to continue with our fight on this issue.
Now, in the government's press release touting that 6-day sweep that arrested 225 people in our area a few weeks ago, ICE took the opportunity to attack our sanctuary city for making the arrests harder. Under law here, New York police do not comply with federal requests to detain the undocumented. Congressman Joe Crowley, who represents parts of the Bronx and Queens, told us via Skype yesterday that what ICE calls an obstacle is actually an anti-crime policy important to his diverse 14th district.
I think it's imperative for public safety that the law enforcement community has a healthy relationship with all people living in New York City, the documented and the undocumented. Because if the undocumented feel as though the local law enforcement is going to carry out the duties of ICE, they won't come forward with information. They won't help New York City police officers and detectives solve crimes or give us information or tips as to even immigrants, illegal immigrants, or documented or undocumented immigrants who mean to do harm. They have a vital role to play in law enforcement, and that needs to remain healthy. The attempt by the Trump administration to undermine that relationship puts all New Yorkers at risk.
Alisa, this is your area at the intersection of criminal justice and immigration. Is this just an excuse that immigrant defenders use, that it helps bring people out of the woodwork when they need to report crimes? ICE's argument is these were some really bad criminals who they were sweeping up. If you look at the 225, they claim, I haven't done it, but they claim that you'll see a lot of people with serious criminal violations.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree that we want safe and thriving communities, and I think the question ends up, whose vision of safety do you trust? Do you trust Donald Trump, who, we saw the clip earlier and has been clear time and time again that his mass deportation agenda is really based on racism and xenophobia, as Antonio was saying, and is willing to kind of use any PR mechanism to get us there? Or do we trust, our representatives like Representative Crowley and Mayor de Blasio and the governor, who've said time and time again that we know what makes our communities safe. We know investing in things that protect public safety, including, enhancing ways that people collaborate with police are important. We see ICE going into courthouses and have actually, at IDP, we've documented the real chilling effect across the state of survivors of violence not wanting to seek protections, people afraid to go into child custody court. So there are really real consequences that we've been able to document.
In the ICE press release, part of which I have right here, it says, ICE continues to face significant obstacles with policies created by local officials which hinder cooperation between ICE and local law enforcement. Yet with the tireless efforts of the men and women of ICE, this operation was a great success. Was it a great success from their standpoint?
I mean, from their standpoint, they were able to issue this press release and, show their base that they've rounded up people. We know that they went into people's homes without warrants, which is unconstitutional. They've gone into farms and they threw a U.S. citizen's phone and arrested him. He was actually speaking at a press conference with the governor today. So, ICE is known and has said that they've been kind of unleashed under the Trump administration. So I think that actually makes their base really happy, and it is a success to them. But I think for New York State, for New York City, I don't feel safer. We aren't safer. People have been traumatized by ICE entering their home in the middle of the night and being taken from their children. I work with a U.S. veteran who was taken from his home in the middle of the night, who deported for a marijuana offense, handcuffed, detained for years. So, I think they can paint whatever picture they want of whole immigrant communities, but these are real people with real contributions.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Cyrus.
When you talk about safety, when an American is convicted of a crime, and some of them are minor, they pay their price, they go through the system, and then they're fine. But if you're an immigrant, you have a green card, you don't just remain dangerous forever just because you were convicted of a crime earlier on. And that's something that people should remember, that immigrants actually face a double penalty because they can get deported and separated from their families because of a prior criminal conviction.
And it's based on this criminal justice system that we've all agreed is,
Right.
Racist and based on bad policy from the 90s.
I just want to make sure that we are clear, even if you're undocumented, you have your constitutional rights. Like, ICE cannot go into your house if they don't have a warrant, right? Making sure, we need to make sure that people do not open the door if they don't have a warrant, like ICE doesn't have a warrant. So I feel like that's important for the folks that are watching this show, to understand that ICE cannot just come into your door and knock the door and let them in. They need to have a warrant in order for them to go into your house.
What do any of you consider legitimate? Because I think some of you would say there is a line that on this side of which is acts by people that are so criminal, and if they're undocumented immigrants, maybe if they're even documented immigrants in some cases, then they should lose the privilege of being in this country. There's a list that the city has, Alisa, of I think it's 170 different crimes where they won't protect you under sanctuary city policies. So is there an agreement? Because I think viewers may have the casual impression that, they want to protect every single criminal immigrant no matter what they've done.
So if I could just take a step back to give a little bit of context, I think it might be helpful. I think most people don't know how incredibly harsh the immigration laws are already, both for undocumented people and people who have status. And so in the 90s, during this kind of war on crime era where many of us, I think, agree that the criminal justice laws went too far, similar immigration laws were passed that had these one striker out policies for a broad range of offenses and really took away discretion on the part of immigration judge to weigh the severity of a crime against any other contributions in your life, like the fact that you're a parent or were in the military or contributed in other ways. And so I think we just need to go back to that prior era where at a minimum, a judge should be able to hear your story and decide whether you deserve to be in the country.
Did you want to add something?
No, I feel like that's important to say, and also I feel like there needs to be a reform on the criminal systems. We have seen a lot of police brutality, but again, as someone mentioned before, like when you see the tone of the skin or when you're undocumented, you might end up in a detention center, so it's a totally different story for our community.
To Alisa's point, the laws are very draconian and broad. So the Supreme Court just recently pushed back on crimes of violence, definition of crimes of violence. And so they were void for vagueness. Otherwise, they were being used to deport immigrants. And so this goes to show that the immigration laws are pretty broad and taken a lot of people needlessly, even if they may not be dangerous to the community.
Right. Do you all agree that what the Trump administration is doing to some degree is staging these occasional sweeps and other kinds of individual raids or arrests in communities to intimidate everybody, to make sure that people are on guard and nervous, and maybe the point of all of that is to dissuade people who are not here yet from trying to come here from Mexico and maybe from other countries?
I mean, as I mentioned before, this is a country made of immigrants. At the end of the day, whether we put a wall or whether we're not, immigrants are going to come. And we have seen that most of the immigrants that come to this country are not coming through the border, are actually coming with visas, right? Historically. And again, I feel like, yes, he's putting a lot of fear in our communities. When we saw the arrest in folks in Tennessee, in other parts of the country, and like their kids didn't go to school on the day after. So he's putting fear. I think as an organizations, we're trying to stop that and try to empower the community that at the end of the day they're not alone, and we have great organizations here for
that sweep of 225 people in 6 days just in our area. how historically unusual is that? Like, Obama did have the reputation, the unflattering nickname of deporter-in-chief by the immigrant community. So how new is this actually?
So yeah, Obama deported more people than any other president, but I think his reason for it was different. He was doing it with the hope of eventually trying to pass comprehensive immigration reform under the thinking that Republicans would agree if he could show how tough he was. And now Trump has inherited his machinery, which allows this mass deportation, but for like clearly different reasons. There's no kind of carrot at the end of the stick. You know, it's just that he wants to make this a whiter America. He wants to limit. He's taking away lawful status from people, whether it's DACA, TPS, restricting visas, and then trying to deport as many people as possible. And to your question before, I think he's really also trying to make a point against politicians, elected officials from places like New York, because our values are so different than his, and it's really an affront to his values that we value, you know, inclusion, diversity.
Remember when Ted Cruz was running against Trump in the primary and accused Trump of having New York values?
Turns out not so much.
Well, maybe New York real estate developer of a certain stripe values. The H-1B visas are for people who have particular skills. This is what Trump says he wants. More skilled immigrants, more people on a, quote, merit-based system who can prove that they have something to contribute to the economy. And yet now they want to restrict H-1B visas more than the current system is. Give our viewers some background on this. What is an H-1B visa? How many people can come on them, in on them each year now? And what is the administration proposing?
In a nutshell, the H-1B visa allows somebody who has a bachelor's degree in a specialized field to work for a U.S. employer. And there are very few H-1B visas each year, 65,000 generally, plus an additional 25,000 for master's degree holders. Only 85,000 each year. The quota gets filled up very quickly as soon as it's opened. And so employers basically are crying out for more H-1B visas, and Congress has not passed more H-1B visas.
So let me ask you a question that some viewers probably have right now. Wait, 85,000 every year? That's not so few, and that's 85,000 college graduates in the United States who may not be able to get jobs.
Oh, no, that's a drop in the bucket when you compare it to the total working force in the United States, clearly. And the people who get hired by employers on H-1B visas are people that are needed by employers. It's a myth that the H-1B is for low-cost workers. That's absolutely not true, because employers have to go through hoops and hurdles to prepare and file an application and pay filing fees, and it's a highly regulated visa program. And therefore, 85,000 is a drop in the bucket. Most of the people who do get picked up are people who generally can't be found here in the United States. They're mainly in the tech sector, and we want to also encourage foreign students to come to the United States, to our great universities. That's the reason why we have such wonderful, venerable institutions. If we can't attract the brightest and skilled foreign students into the US, and we have to send them back, then our universities will also suffer.
And I realize that you're an immigration lawyer representing H-1B applicants, among others, but if American students or students in colleges were turning out, or becoming, in the case of the students, engineering majors, computer science majors in greater numbers, would that make the need for so many H-1B visas less?
It might, but let the market forces determine this.
Yes.
Let employers make that decision. Right now, there's clearly a need for these sort of workers, especially in the engineering and computer fields. And then we have all these emerging technologies for artificial intelligence, driverless vehicles, and so there is that need for such workers. On the other hand, we also as a country want to attract talented people. So even if people may not come from tech fields, but let's say they have a degree in journalism and they can contribute to the United States, or a law degree, we still want to attract foreign professional and skilled workers.
I'm going to put up a chart that shows what metropolitan areas in America, in the United States, have the biggest concentration of H-1B visa holders. And look at College Station, Texas, all by itself up there, way, way, way beyond, with that blue bar going all the way to the right, anywhere else. And then Trenton is second, so that might be the Princeton area, which has a lot of tech companies, and a couple of ticks down, New York. What's going on in College Station, Texas?
This might be the headquarters of a tech company, probably Cognizant. And this doesn't mean that there are only 31 H-1Bs or 31,000. It means there are 31 for every 100 workers. That's how this chart has been
I see. So it might not be pure numbers of H-1B visas
not.
relative to the New York and other metropolitan areas.
No.
It might be that College Station is so small, but they have this really big tech firm. So an outsized percentage of the local population there are H-1B
That's right,
holders.
and this is where the headquarters might be based, and that doesn't mean that H-1B workers work there. They might be being sponsored from the headquarter company, and they may be assigned to other client projects in different parts of the United States.
Interesting. And let me stay with you for one more minute. There's something breaking in the news today, I think, having to do with something called the entrepreneurial rule. What's that?
Yeah, so that was an Obama-era creative rule. The president always has authority to parole people from a foreign country to the United States. And this was primarily used to bring in refugees or people fleeing communism. So presidents throughout in the 20th century used their parole power to bring in Vietnamese refugees and people fleeing Hungary and Czechoslovakia into the United States. What Obama did was to use his parole power to bring in talented entrepreneurs who could set up the next Google. Basically, if you could establish that you have a startup in the US, it's been funded by professional venture capitalists, and it does have promise, then that person can be paroled into the United States to set up the startup and do business and be here legally. And the reason why he did that was because Congress till now, in a short-sighted manner, has not passed an entrepreneur visa, startup visa. A lot of other countries do have startup visas. Canada has a startup visa, Chile has a startup visa, but we in the United States don't have a startup visa to attract foreign entrepreneurs. If we see some of our great companies like Google or eBay or Tesla, they've all been founded by foreign entrepreneurs.
We haven't touched yet on the Supreme Court hearing today on the Trump travel ban. That's a handful of countries, most of them mostly Muslim countries, plus North Korea and selected individuals from Venezuela. Is this, you know people at Queens College, because I know Queens College has students from literally everywhere in the world, people talking about the travel ban, the alleged Muslim ban?
Well, I feel like it's a topic everywhere, right? I feel like people who are immigrants understand the reality, like how hard we've been attacked over the last few years, but particularly the Muslim and the immigrant community has been the worst, especially after being at John F. Kennedy and seeing family separation at the airport, right? Like not letting people coming into the United States. It was horrible. Obviously, there's conversations everywhere. I feel like today, particularly from everything that is going on at the Supreme Court, we're just expecting, like, you know, the news and see finally the Supreme Court make the right decision and stop this xenophobic and racist policy that, you know, Trump made last year.
This goes back again to things Trump said during the campaign. There was that moment in, I think it was December 2015, where he said, I, Donald Trump, hereby proclaim that I'm proposing to ban all Muslims from entering the United States. And even he has said, oh, well, this is the watered down, politically correct version. But then he turns around and tries to argue to the Supreme Court that it's not based on religion. And yet, my reading of how that went in court today is that more justices bought his argument than not.
Yeah, it's unusual that people don't try to hide their racism in passing these policies. You know, it's so clearly out there. So I think the justices have to look at, if on its face, this, I think it's the third version of the travel ban, doesn't have clearly, isn't clearly a religious test, does the fact that we know that was his purpose matter? And does the fact that all of these different national security experts say there's actually no national security reason for banning these countries, does that matter? And yeah, from what I've read, I'm not that hopeful about it today.
Yeah, I mean, we can't really read the tea leaves in oral arguments, but of course, one has to be pessimistic about it. But fundamentally, this travel ban basically undermines the values of this nation. Never before has a president banned millions of people based on his executive authority. And it was, as we all have noticed, based on animus against Islam. It also undermines the separation of powers doctrine, because Congress actually passes laws with regards to who can immigrate. Under Trump's ban, no Iranian national, for example, millions of Iranians now can't immigrate to the United States, even if they've been legitimately sponsored under our immigration laws for family-based or employment-based visas. And so that totally violates the separation of powers.
The Trump appointee to the Supreme Court, Gorsuch, voted with the liberals on another recent immigration case, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Can you talk about that case?
Sure. So that was the case that
Yes.
Cyrus was talking about, Demaya, where the court found that this statute that's used as a mandatory deportation statute, which means people don't even get to go before an immigration judge to argue any of their contributions, was void for vagueness because the language in the statute was so vague. And Gorsuch concurred and said, there was a question that that's a policy in criminal law that if something's so vague, you have to be on notice that, okay, if I do this act, I should be aware there would be criminal consequences. And so the court said that applies to immigration law too, which is often more punitive than criminal law. People are sometimes deported to their death or separated forever from their family. And Gorsuch said that he actually thought it should apply to all civil law because everyone should be able to understand what the law is.
So maybe he'll strike down the travel ban?
I think it's a little bit of a different issue for him, unfortunately. But
we have under a minute left. What's your major?
Film and political science. Yeah.
Are you going to try to be a documentary filmmaker?
Well, I'm hoping that, at some point in history we pass the Dream Act, and at some point I want to run for city council. So that's my hope.
got my vote.
Good luck.
Thank you.
What would your platform be?
Well, support the voiceless community that we have. I feel like we are underrepresented, especially in New York, where the Mexican community is the second largest, and we only have one city council. So hopefully, I will be the second one.
Is that Menchaca, by the way?
Menchaca, yeah.
Oh, and he's the youngest city councilman, I believe, or when he was first elected.
Yeah, I believe so.
So you may replace him in that category.
Oh, we need to pass the Dream Act first.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
And that's our program for today. We're here each week, midweek, at this hour, at this week, the frightening for immigrants intersection of politics and everyday life. Catch me on the radio as well, weekdays 10 a.m. to noon on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, New York Times political reporter Amy Chozick uncovering Hillary Clinton during both her presidential campaigns. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.